This lesson is for those of you that need a little more practice or a refresher course on how to graph lines or any equation in general. The method that we use to graph in lesson 4.1 is the method that you could use to graph any equation that you will ever encounter for the rest of your math existence. So for those of you that forgot, the method that we use in this lesson to graph is using a table. There will be other methods that you'll learn as we go through chapter 4. If you've already watched the 4.4 video, you know one of the quickest techniques, but I won't give that away right now. So we graph using a table or chart. So I'm going to make x, and then I'm going to make the middle column say the equation, negative 2x plus 3, and then y. This is being squeezed in here. I would obviously like to have more space, and if you need more space, you can always grab another sheet of paper. So since I made the chart, I get to plug in the numbers I want to use, and I'm going to think ahead about what numbers might fit on the grid, because you can never plot off a grid. If you need to plot off a grid, you go and you get a bigger piece of graph paper. So one number that I know will fit will be 0. So y equals, now wherever I see an x, I put a 0. So negative 2 times 0 plus 3. Now when I follow order of operations, that gives me 3. Be careful, do your order of operations properly. So I will graph the point 0, 3 when it's time to graph. Let's do another one. Let's do 1. So y equals negative 2 times 1 plus 3. That is positive 1. So eventually I will plot the point 1, 1. I'll do one more point, and I'll plug in 2. Y equals negative 2 times 2 plus 3. That gives me negative 1. Now I would preferably like to have a positive 0 and a negative, but because I was thinking ahead, I know when I plug in negative 1, it won't fit on this grid. So I plugged in positive 2, even though it's against my better judgment. So let's plot the point 0, 3, 1, 1, and 2, negative 1. They should all line up. Make your line nice and long, and you should always put the name on the line. All right, if you're ready, let's go to the next one. So I've got this equation, y equals negative 1/3 x, so I have to pay attention to the negative sign and the fraction when I go to graph. And since I get to pick the numbers, I'm going to pick numbers that are friendly with 1/3. And we talked in class about how to make friendly numbers, and it's going to be multiples of the denominator. So obviously 0 is going to be friendly. So that gives me negative 1/3 times 0, and anything times 0 is 0. So I'll eventually plot the point 0, 0. Now I'm not going to plug in 1 or 2 because those will give me decimals. I'll plug in 3. Negative 1/3 times 3. That gives me negative 1. So I will eventually plot the point 3, negative 1. If you don't know how I got negative 1, you need to come for help with fractions. Now, since I told you in the earlier question, if I have room, I would like to plug in a positive, a negative, and 0. So I'm thinking ahead, and I know that negative 3 will fit on the grid. So y equals negative 1/3 times negative 3, and that gives me positive 1, so I will eventually plot the point negative 3, positive 1. So let's plot the points, 0, 0. Oops, that's a little off. 3, negative 1, and negative 3, positive 1. Hopefully you're a little more accurate with your dots than I am. So make the line, make it nice and extended, and put the equation on the line. All right, 3 and 4 are a little different because they are either horizontal or vertical. And if you go back to our 4.1 notes video, there's a section that tells you what y equals lines look like and what x equals lines look like. But if you don't know, you can't think of it off the top of your head, what do? Excellent, you make a chart. So I've got x, I've got y equals 4, and I've got y. So I get to plug in what I want. I obviously always prefer 0. Now when I plug it in, there's no x over here, so there's nothing for me to do because there's nowhere to plug in the 0. So they told me that doesn't matter what you plug in, but the y value has to be 4. So it has to be a 4 here. Now I plug in 1, and again, there's nowhere for me to plug in x into this equation, so I just have to put 4. I'll pick a negative. There's nowhere for me to plug in, so y has to be 4. So I'm plotting the point 0, 4, 1, 4, and negative 1, 4. Hopefully you see that that creates a horizontal line, and you put the equation on it. Now, some of you are making horizontal lines for other equations. The only time you have a horizontal is when it says y equals a number. All right, let's go to the next one. Let me make my chart. X equals -1 and y. Now for this one, I actually don't get to pick whatever I want to plug in. I have to pick the number that they tell me to plug in. And in this case, they're telling me that I have to plug in -1. So anything in this column better say -1 or else you're wrong. So I pick -1, and then, like, whatever, there really isn't anything to do with the -1. It just says x has to be -1. So I can pick any number I want, and my favorite number is 0 because it's easy. Then x has to be -1 again, because again, they're telling me what it has to be. It has to be -1. And I'll make this a 2, just because I randomly decided to put a 2. You could put something else if you want, just make sure it fits on the grid. And here's another -1, and I'll make this -3 because I like a negative somewhere in there as well. So now let's plot. I'm plotting the point -1, 0, -1, 2, and -1, -3. Now, if you are at the point where you know what x equals and y equals lines look like, then you don't have to make these charts like I am. I don't, because I know that y equals a number is going to be horizontal, and x equals a number is going to be vertical. If you're at the point that you understand that, these charts are totally unnecessary for you. They might be necessary for someone else who's not quite at that point yet, but hopefully they will be at some point in your experience, and you won't have to make the chart. But if you're not there yet, that's okay. All right, last one together. The equation y equals 2x plus 4 represents the cost in dollars of renting a movie after X days. We have to graph the equation, and if you don't know what to do, what do you make? Excellent, a chart. So I've got X, I've got y equals 2x plus 4, and y. So I plug in 0, so y equals 2 times 0 plus 4. Make sure you follow order of operations. That gives you 4. Now I'll plug in, I don't know, 2, because I chose whatever. It's my choice. I can pick whatever I want. Y equals 2 times 2 plus 4. That gives me 8. And normally I would plug in a negative, but if x, remember when there's a story it matters, if x stands for the number of days late, then I can't be -1 days late because that sounds ridiculous. So I actually have to pick another positive, so in this case I will pick 1. Although now it's bothering me that they're not in order, but you know, whatever, I'll get over it. So that is, oh whoops, I wrote 2 and I meant 1. So 2 times 1. So that gives me 6. So I will plot the point 0, 4, 2, 8, and 1, 6. First I have to make my axes, and again, since I can't have negative days or negative money, I'm going to keep myself in the first quadrant. When there's a story, you're typically in the first quadrant, but sometimes you could be negative. You just want to pay attention to if it makes sense. So let's plot the points. 0, 4, and 2, 8, and 1, 6. Now you want to connect them with a nice straight line. And you should always write the equation, if you have one, on the line or somewhere near it. And that's letter A. B says to interpret the slope. Remember, interpret means to use a complete sentence and explain. So we're going to explain using a complete sentence and the labels in the story. So what is the slope? Well, if you calculate, the slope is up to, write 1. So 2 over 1 means if it's up to, then that's the y value, and y is dollars. So $2 for, and the run was 1. So that was 1 across, and that was the x-axis value. So that stands for days late. $2 for 1 day late. A better way of saying it would be $2 for each day late, or $2 per day late. That's a better phrasing, but $2 for 1 day late is fine. Letter C, use the graph to determine how much it cost after 3 days. Well, 3 days is going to be an x value of 3. So if the x value is 3 right here, then what's the price? That point right there. What are the coordinates? That's 3 comma what? It looks like it's 3 comma 10. So $10 would be the price, because that's the y value when the x is 3. When you plug in 3, you would get 10, right? Because y equals 2 times 3, and that would be 10. So you can see you can get it using the equation if you want, or using the graph like it asks. Just find that point where it hits the line. All right, if you still need more help, you should go to see the lesson tutorial videos in the online textbook. You can also go back and re-watch the 4.1 video. You can also come see me for help, but please get help if you still are confused on this lesson.